A library's nonfiction collection contains traditional literature, biographies, informational texts, and poetry. Less than 50% of these traditional libraries are actually fiction and picture books. The rest are nonfiction, and these are some of the most checked out books in the library. When you ask kids why they want to read informational books, they'll tell you they are curious. It's easier to find the answer from reading rather than asking teachers. They like pictures. They like to learn things from reading. Teenagers tell me that they like true stories of real people surviving tough situations, stories of war and true crime. Boys especially love to read true stories of athletes overcoming obstacles to achieve their dreams. When I hear people say that libraries don't need many nonfiction books, they obviously have no idea what kids and teens like to read. Many students prefer true stories, and the library stats prove this. Let's start with informational books. Informational texts are books where you get verifiable factual info or explain some aspect of the world. Adults often view these works as merely functional, boring, because their purpose is to inform rather than to entertain or inspire. But the new informational texts are inspiring and thought-provoking. Today, most informational texts are beautifully crafted, carefully researched, and well-written. Several developments have contributed to the changing face of nonfiction. With advancements in internet research and printing, these books are better researched and often have large endnotes where authors share their sources. They have primary documents and photographs and links that students can go to other books or websites where they can learn more about the subject. Even more than printing and research, the event that was the biggest effect on informational text market was the adoption of the Common Core standards. In these standards, they suggested a 50-50 split between literary and informational text starting in kindergarten, which was very different than the fiction-heavy language arts curriculum of the past. This was huge. The reasons why they wanted to incorporate more informational text is that narrative texts in the past had dominated elementary school curriculum. And most reading that we do as adults is actually nonfiction or informational reading. But children's had difficulty with informational texts in the upper grades, many times because of this lack of experience in primary grades. So they wanted kids to start working with informational texts at an early age, so that by the time they get in high school, they'll have an easier time with textbooks and all those informational texts you're required to be reading. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should be throwing out all fiction text, which has sometimes happened, but it does mean there needs to be a place for informational text in your classrooms. After the adoption, the market for informational text exploded, and teachers and librarians were desperate for high-quality informational text, and authors and publishers really have delivered. So here's some key features of informational text. They should contain knowledge students should demonstrate or be able to share. They have labels and captions with the illustrations, so it's easy for students to find information, and the text is easy for kids to read. They're well organized with a glossary, an index, a bibliography, and their illustrations tend to be full-color photographs to bring these real things to life. There's all kinds of different informational texts. There's some about animals. Some that I would recommend are Ruxa and Reina, which is a true story of the cheetah and the dog in the San Diego Zoo that are best friends and survived these crazy health conditions. I cry every time I read the book to my son. And if you're looking for cuteness, A Little Book of Sloth is about a real sloth sanctuary, and it will warm your heart. There are all kinds of course science books, and history books are some of the most changed because our views of history obviously have dramatically changed over the years. And one that I would highly recommend is the new book Stamped, which is a remix of Ibram Kendi's National Book Award winning book Stamped from the Beginning, and it's rewritten by my favorite, Jason Reynolds, and it will make you examined the forefathers like Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln and all of American history, and seeing how racism has been institutionalized in our country. It is a phenomenal read. And of course, there's much, much more. Okay. The amount of information available to humans doubles every few years, and some futurists predict that in about 2 decades, available information will double every few months. Consequently, it should be no surprise that informational books comprise half of all the books in library collections. Children have inquiry minds, and they want to learn about themselves, their world, times, and places that they have never seen. Informational books quench this thirst for knowledge and spark new curiosity. They can be found in the nonfiction part of the library in the Dewey Decimal System. Now let's move on to talking about biographies. Biographies are a well-written biography makes children feel if the subjects are their personal friends. They carry with them into adulthood a love of nonfiction that portrays the lives of interesting people. A well-written biography is as engrossing as a high-action fiction book, but is exciting knowing that the events are really happening. Writers of biographies have many people to choose from, but who they write about and how they write about them has changed over time. In the past, early biographies were mostly written for a white male middle class with heroes, and they tend to really glorify the exploits of these people, making them individuals without fault. But in the 1960s and 70s, traditional values were changing, and educators started to believe that cleaning up history was really distorting history from what really happened, and made kids think that they had to be perfect in order to do great things. So today's biographies try to show both sides of a person's character. They also, when we're looking at biographies today, we're really looking for a lot of factual accuracy. We want to see primary sources, photos, and other lists of bibliographies in the back of the books. Like in Finding Winnie, you can see these pictures of the actual bear, Winnie, that inspired Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin, and the man who owned him. So there are different types of biographies. There are complete biographies that contain the person's entire life, like Who Was Martin Luther King Jr., which tells about his entire life, or partial biographies that focus on a certain section of their life, like when Marion sang a certain part of Marian Anderson's life. There are collective biographies that talk about the biography of many individuals. There are also autobiographies and memoirs where the book is written by the person who's telling the story is telling their own story. An autobiography, though, is telling the entire life of a person in chronological order, whereas a memoir talks about one specific aspect of a person's life. So Laughing at My Nightmare is an autobiography because Shane Burkow, who's spinal muscular atrophy, gives you kind of his entire life story in order in this, whereas Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson focuses on her life and the events that impacted her as a writer. So that's a memoir. There is, of course, fictionalized biography, which you know is really part of historical fiction, where they've done a lot of research and based it on the lives of famous people or famous events. But because they can't recreate maybe dialogue, then it's not verifiable, and so it's a fictionalized account. So there is so much value to incorporating nonfiction in your classroom. It provides content knowledge, it expands background knowledge, and there is a virtual consensus that background knowledge is essential for reading comprehension. Put simply, the more you know about a topic, the easier it is for a text to understand it and retain information. Previous studies have shown that background knowledge plays an enormous role in reading comprehension. It promotes exploration and wondering about the world, and it strengthens a child's ability to read for information. Teaching with biographies and informational texts will enliven history, science, music, math, and art lessons. You can use them with free reading, readers' theater, and read-alouds. Kids are fascinated by true stories, and make room for some nonfiction in your life and be prepared to be impressed.